Take it away.
Great. All right, again, if you're unfamiliar with me, my name is Jeffrey Way. I'm a web developer, of course. I'm the editor of NetText Plus, kind of a self-diagnosed Laravel evangelist. Probably a little irritatingly too much. We do a lot of content. Like I said, I post on NetText. I'm the editor of that site. Actually, can I get a raise of hands if you've heard of NetText Plus? If you haven't heard, shame on you. Yeah, it's done. What about if you've contributed to NetText Plus? Raise your hand. It's pretty good. That's actually more than usual. Usually when I speak at places, maybe there might be that one token place. But yeah, I think that's really great. I was hoping to sort of make NetText the kind of like the third-party site where you go to learn about Laravel. Of course, you have the official documentation. But then I wanted this place where I could find these people who are really writing good content and then be able to expose their writing to a much bigger audience. NetText is huge. We have millions of visitors to the site every month. So if I can track down these guys where you're writing just incredible articles on your own site and instead say, can you bring that over to NetText, then we're actually making it available to millions of people. Okay. So, like I said, if you're familiar with me, maybe you've seen some of my screencast courses. I do a lot on Test Plus Premium. I've written magazine articles, so maybe you've gone to a bookstore. I've written a lot about Laravel there. And of course, lots of irritating blogging and tweeting, which if you don't like Laravel, just pisses you off, and you probably don't follow me anymore. There's NetText. There's Test Plus Premium. And yeah, then I had this whole thing where I was going to talk about being a good community. And then, of course, Taylor goes and talks about it for 10 minutes and completely ruins this portion of my talk. But the basic idea was I just wanted to say it's really important that we have a friendly community. I'm not going to reiterate everything he said, but the basic idea is that what I consider to be the 4 keys to some successful framework or a tool or a library, maybe like jQuery or CodeIgniter or Laravel. So first you got the code base, of course. Taylor has done an amazing job at that, and I'm always spying on his code and making myself better. You got the documentation, which he talked about, and I'm so glad he's a fan of that. Because so many times you come across these really great tools with no documentation. And I get it, like documentation sucks, it's the bane of our existence, but you have to do it. And so if you want somebody to use your tool or your framework or your library, you have to show them how to use the tool. Third, we have evangelists. These are the people like, if you're in this room, I bet you've read Dale's book. He's one of the original evangelists. Of course, Ian hiring Taylor, of course, makes him the original evangelist. I like to think of myself as an evangelist. Anyone who's written an article, these are the people who get to the Laravel store on day 1 and fire everything up. And then, of course, the community. And we just want to make sure that it's a friendly community. I think that's so important. If you look at some of our competitors, not to name names, but some of them, it's just kind of built on arrogance. And if you're not as smart as us, then you don't deserve to be in this community. I really hate that. It detracts people from wanting to join you. So I think we want to create a community where even if you're getting started or you're very advanced, you're welcomed here. And then the more people that join, the better it is for the community. All right, so let's get started with my talk. We're going to be talking about testing. Taylor said API development. That was the original idea, and then we changed it. So I had this whole plan. I was going to cover everything related to TDD, testing models and controllers and mocking and all the different jargon. This is the terrible thing about testing, is all of the jargon. Who knows what unit and functional and acceptance and all these different little frameworks, and every language may have some kind of different name for the same style of testing. It sucks. But as I started preparing my presentation, I realized it's too much to cover in 45 minutes. I want to cover what we can actually get done and what maybe will actually stick rather than your generic overview of TDD, which I think at this point, everyone has the basic understanding of what TDD is. So I don't want to cover that. I want to cover, okay, you like TDD, you want to start getting into it, how do you do it? So we'll focus on 3 things. Testing controllers, how can you mock objects so that you're not actually touching your database, and then we're also going to talk about something that a lot of people don't deal with. We talk about readability with the production code, but then if you go to the tests, it's just so difficult to decipher. And that's really important too. All right, believe it or not, that's my only slides. The rest of this talk is going to be live coding. So, it's going to be tough, guys. So if you've ever been in front of 100 people and you have to code live, it's not very fun. But let's see how you do. All right, so the first thing is, before we get started testing, I wanted to have just something to test. So I wanted to have some kind of resource set up. And I was going to do this before the talk, but then I thought, why don't we I'll show you my workflow using a generator tool I built. So, there we go, okay. Here's a generator tool I built, and I just released it a few days ago. And it gives you the ability to generate lots of stuff really quick. So okay, so you can see, once you install it, you can get it through packages, and you can generate like migrations and models and seed files. All that stuff that you might do manually, well, you can just use a generate tool, and it will do it for you. And even Laravel comes with some of these. If you've ever done in Laravel 4, artisan, controller, make, that's a generator. This just adds a few more that does some cool things. All right, so let's get started. Watch what happens if I do PHP artisan generate a resource for a post. And we're going to specify the fields as well. So if I create a post table, what, damn it, you guys didn't tell me if you can't see it.
Excuse my language, you're bad on the screen.
What's that?
You're fine on the TV with
Okay, but I can't mess up all the people looking at the main screen. All right, if you ever can't see, just yell out my name and I'll redo it. Anyway, so watch what happens if we generate a resource for a post, and the fields will be what fields would you want from a post table. We're going to keep it crazy simple just so we don't get bogged down. So we just want to have a title, and its type should be a string. So watch what happens if I run this. It's just going to do tons of stuff. And this is really cool. I like this. I think you like it too. So the first thing it does is it's going to create a post controller. If you're creating a resource for a post, then you need a way to display all posts, one post, the RESTful style. Let's take a look at database and migrations. It's going to create a migration for you, and it's also going to read that fields and populate that for you so that you don't have to worry about that. Next, this is very new as of like last week, the latest version of the beta. This is how you would seed a table. So basically, you create a class, you give it a table name, just follow some kind of convention, but you can name it whatever you want. And here, maybe say title is my first post, and then one more, my second post. We don't really care about this, it's just random data. Anyway, so we got that. It's also going to know that you probably want to have an eloquent model, so it'll create a post model for you. Again, this is like one line of code, and this is doing that for you. Next, it's going to create some tests for you, just basic tests to make sure that those routes are working. Don't worry about that too much just yet. And then if I go into views, you'll see that I have this post folder, and it'll create a handful of views for you. So all of this was done with basically one line of code. So watch what happens now if I go back to PHP artisan. PHP artisan migrate. We're going to migrate the database, and let's make sure we seed it too. PHP artisan DB Okay, so now if I open up C Pro, we reload it. We basically run 3 commands. We did generate a resource, and then we migrated the database. In Laravel 4, you didn't have this in version 3, but in version 4, you don't have to run migrate install anymore. Just run migrate, and it will detect whether you need to install that for you. And then, of course, it creates the post table. I should have timestamps. Who cares? That's fine. But again, all this was done with like 3 lines of code. That's cool, right? I think it's cool. Nobody's talking though, so you guys don't. So, of course, let's go into the post controller, and let's return post all to see how this works. And then I'll show you a couple other things that it does. PHP artisan serve. That'll create our server. You can see that. We ran PHP artisan serve. And now I browse to post. That's returning. And when you return post all or something like that in version 4, it's actually going to return it as JSON. So again, I think this is cool, personally. Wrong some line text. So 2 other things it'll do. It knows that because you're generating a resource, it's just going to go ahead and update your routes file and insert that for you. And then also, when you create a seed file, you also need to call it from your root database seeder, and it will go ahead and do that for you as well. So a few lines of code, and you can really rapidly stack full of your applications. All right, so let's get started. Can anyone tell me, let's update this. Post, and then maybe return, view make, post index, and all right, so basically this would just return a view, and it's going to send through post collection to the view. Can anyone tell me? Good job, guys. Can anyone tell me? This isn't bad. In fact, this is a fine way to do it. You go get post all. But what is the potential downside to doing this? Can anyone tell me?
Classes hard-coded.
Classes hard-coded. So here's the problem. We're doing post all, and now we've created this link between our controller and an ORM like eloquent, and that isn't ideal. It's fine for low-level projects. I've done this for stuff. If you watch my videos, I will even show you how to do this. However, once you get to higher level stuff and you want to make more testable applications, this is not ideal. And again, it's because it's more difficult to test. We have this strong link now between our controller and our post model. So how could we fix this? What would be the solution so that maybe if we want to inject something else, maybe we don't want to use Eloquent, maybe we want to use Mongo, maybe we want to use some kind of file-based layer. The solution would be dependency injection. So this is one of those things that's very scary. Dependency injection is just jargon to refer to literally injecting your dependencies through the constructor. So rather than referencing post directly, let's instead inject the post repository or the database layer. And then that way in the future, when you want to test it, well, you can use a mock. And if we're injecting it, then you can easily inject the mock. But when we don't do that, we can't really use a mock here when we're running post all. It's not good. So let's try this. Let's say post protected post. All right. So now instead of doing post all, we could do something like this post all. This isn't finished yet, but this would be the basic idea. We're going to inject it, then we're going to set this post, and then we're going to use this post API, and we're going to call the all method. And now if you do want to switch it out in the future, you can. It's not going to be an issue, because then you'll just inject your other type of repository, Mongo or file or whatever you want to do, and it will still work. But let's try this out. Let's save that. If I run it, binding resolution exception, unresolvable dependency. So here's what's happening. Laravel is trying to figure out what we need to do, but we just give it posts. So it's like, I have no idea what to do. Let's just try to give it a type hint. Let's just do posts like we did before. I run it, and well, it works. So what's going on here? Like, how did Laravel know that when we set a type hint here, that it should inject an instance of post? And watch, if I, forget it. But I'm not going to go out on a limb coding in front of 100 people. So, anyways, so we need to figure out a little bit more about this, and to do so, we should look at the IOC container. So let's take a look at. I'm just going to do this in a routes file, and when somebody requests the home page, let's do this. Let's create a class for a customer, and within here, let's just simply var dump a new customer. Very basic stuff. But if I come back and we load the home page, you get a customer object. But now we're starting to learn that we want to build more testable applications. We should inject any dependencies that customer might have rather than referencing them directly. So now we're learning, okay, well, customer, we should inject something. I have no idea, maybe an order or something like that. Add that protected order. And now, when we create a new instance of customer, we also have to pass in a new instance of order, right? We have that, create your class, order. Now if I run it, once again, exactly what you would expect, right? This is basic stuff. But now we're starting to see, okay, we're trying to build more testable applications, but now anytime we create these new instances, we're having to fill out all these dependencies. It's just not fun, you know? We want to create readable code. So this is where the IOC container can help. And again, IOC, I mean, I bet a bunch of you don't even really know what it is. And that's because it's just confusing terminology. So watch what happens if I say app. Now this is kind of cool. The app extends the container, so we can take advantage of all of that IOC stuff. So I would say app bind customer, and let's just go ahead and paste this in. Okay, so now we're binding customer, and whenever we resolve that, this callback or the closure is going to run. Oh, that's not right. Seriously, guys, if you see me doing something wrong, speak up. Okay, anyways, now when we call app make customer, this closure is going to run for us. So let's see what happens. Let's run app var dump app make.
You need a return to
customer. What's that?
you need a return in the IOC.
Yeah. Okay, but now we get the exact same thing. So now we've taken this complicated bit of code, and of course that will be more complicated in a real-world application, and we've just created this little thing we can do, app make customer, and it still works. All right, but here is where the magic comes. Watch what happens if I just delete this, or we'll comment it out. So now we're no longer going to bind customer to that closure. Let's see what happens now. It still works. This is so cool. The first time I saw Taylor do this, I was like, whoa, that's so neat. So we've gotten rid of this entirely, but it still works. And that's because Laravel is using PHP reflection to read this. So when we say app make customer, sorry, so much noise. Anyways, when we say app make customer, Laravel's going to go, okay, there's a class named customer. They probably want to instantiate that. So let's instantiate class customer. And then it comes to the constructor, and it's going to know, okay, well, we're trying to inject something, and the person has specified a type into order, so I'm just going to go ahead and find that for them and inject it for you. So that means if you create your class, you specify your constructor, you use type hints here to give little hints for what you need, Laravel is so smart that it's going to do it for you. That means I can get rid of this entirely, and it's still going to work. That is so cool. You guys should be amazed by that. They're all silent. Seriously. Okay, so how does that really help us, though? Well, now we know that when we use this type in, Laravel is going to be smart enough, and it's going to inject an instance of post. But it's not exactly what we want. Let's try this. Let's create a post repository interface. So now, instead of injecting a specific post class, we're going to inject an interface. And let's see what happens there. I reload it. Oh, by the way, whoever's running this, if you can give me a quick warning when there's 10 minutes left. Thank you, Ian. Anyways, class customer does not exist. Okay, so now we're getting a reflection exception class post repository interface does not exist, obviously, so let's go ahead and create that. Let's create a repositories folder. And within here, we'll create our first interface, post repository interface. And I'll go ahead and paste one in. Okay, so now we've created an interface, and a very common way to think about interfaces, if you're not overly familiar with them, is as a contract. This defines the contract for any implementation of post repository interface. So that means if you want to use this contract, well, you're going to have an all method, and you have to have a store method. You can do whatever you want within there, but you have to define that API, so to speak. So here, just stick with all for now. We're going to define, okay, whatever uses it needs to offer some kind of all method. So now we've created this repositories folder, but if I run it again, yeah, you're not going to get anything different, and that's because Laravel needs to be told about this. So you have a couple options. You could use namespacing. We're not going to do it here just to keep things a little quicker. You go to your composer.json file and auto-load app/repositories. but then you would still have to keep doing that composer dump autoload that we all hate. Another way, let's just leverage by going to the start folder in global. Let's just copy this repositories like that. And now Laravel is going to autoload those directories for us, or that directory. So now if I run it, we're going to get another one, finding resolution exception. So now this is obvious. It's saying, hey, you're trying to inject host repository interface. Of course, I can't inject that, or I can't create an instance of that. So now, this is where we can build our first implementation. Let's create one. Host repository. Class host repository. And here's where we're going to make sure that we want to implement that interface. Implements host repository interface. All right, let's just see what happens if I keep it like that. I reload it. No, nothing's going to happen. So we need some way to go back. We need some way to tell Laravel, hey, when you need an instance of host repository interface, because that's what's happening, it's trying to inject host repository interface. So what we want to tell it is, hey, when you need an instance of that, here's what I want you to use. Now in our case, we want to use, I'm sorry, not host. Let's make this our eloquent version. So how would we do that? Well, let's just go maybe to routes. Right at the top, we'll say app find host repository interface to eloquent host repository. Okay, so this is basically saying when you need an instance of host repository interface, I want you to use eloquent host repository. So now if I run it, class, here's our next thing. This is what's so cool about using interfaces. Now it's saying, well, hey, the interface defines that you need an all method, but you didn't use one. So either make it abstract or implement it. Cool. So let's go ahead and do that. Create function all. Class eloquent host repository does not exist. Of course not. Again, you guys got to speak up. Okay, but now it's working. So this is what's so cool. We've specified in our controller we want an instance of host repository interface. We specified in our routes, or you can put that somewhere else if you want. When you need an instance of that, use eloquent host repository. So then ultimately a new instance of this is injected into your controller. So here's where it gets cool. Let's say you want to do something else. Maybe, I don't know, some kind of file-based repository, I don't know, anything you want. Let's say you do that, file, host repository, implements host repository interface, and all. Return all with file. This doesn't really make much sense, but it's fine. Now, if I go back to my routes file, I'm going to say, okay, instead of using eloquent, let's say we want to update our code down the line, we're going to use a file-based version. So I'll change that to file host repository. So let's see if that works. And it doesn't. Bind host repository interface to file host repository. And let's just Laracon. Okay, but now we're using the file implementation, and here's the thing. We didn't have to edit a single line of our controller, and this is what you want. You don't want to bind your controller to an ORM. We want to be able to inject our repository or our database layer, so to speak. So that's very cool. Okay, next section. So now that we know how we can inject this, let's see how we can go about running some tests. So let's close all of these. And remember when we generated that resource, they went ahead and did just a handful of just quickie tests for you. And basically what this does is it's going to say, this call get hosts, and that would be like your collection. And we're just going to make sure that the response is okay. So there is a good status code there. So if I run PHP unit, we're going to get example tests. Let's get rid of this is one that's provided for you by Laravel. Let's do it again. Okay, but now everything is working as we would expect. We have 4 tests. But I don't want to do all of this. I'm going to remove some of these. Let's go over this a little bit more. So we're going to call this call, and then as the first argument, we're going to specify the HTTP method. Get, post, put, delete. And then we're going to name the route. So in this case, it's simply going to execute get, post, That's essentially what's going to happen. And so then the post controller is going to run, and essentially this method is going to be fired. So that's what we're testing. So now we have this way to assert that the status was good. Delete that. But what else might we want to assert? What about if I'm grabbing all the posts, and that means the view that I load, well, I probably need to have access to like a post variable. And then you can say like for each post is post, echo post, title, whatever you want to do. So that would be a good thing to test. Let's make sure that the view receives a post variable. How might you do that? Well, let's try this. You could create a new test if you want. Some people would say one test per method. I think when you're doing controllers, if you want to do two, that's okay. Don't worry about it so much. Let's do this. This, assert true. And now we'll say response, original, and then the name of the variable. And let's just make sure that we test that, make sure it's a true value. So what we've done here is we're saying response, and then you have this option you can say get content. And so if you do get content in a controller method, and that loads a view, that would like return the HTML string that you could then decipher. But if you actually want to get before that, you could say get original content, or we could just say original. So now let's just make sure that post variable exists. Run it. And it works. And by the way, let's go back to the file and get rid of that. In fact, let's get rid of the file entirely. Go to our Rust file and switch that back to Eloquent. Again, we just switched out our file repository with Eloquent using 5 characters. Anyways, if we run it again, that's working. So why is that working? Well, it's because we created this post variable and we sent it through. So let's just see, maybe we don't do that. Let's return view make. Index. All right, now if we run it, if maybe you're following more of a TDD cycle, can you see that? Yeah. Well, now it's going to fail and it says, hey, undefined index post, I thought something would be there, but it's not. And that way you can know, okay, well, I need to make sure that I send through posts to the view. Now if we run it, it is working. Great, so now we're writing a lot of tests, and this is going to be hugely beneficial. I know at first a lot of people think, like even this one, like, oh, that's just superfluous. Why do you even need that? Well, in the end, let's say maybe you're editing something, and maybe you think you're changing something, maybe you add some extra text, maybe you delete it entirely. Well, now when you're running your automated PHP unit test, if you do make that mistake, it's going to let you know immediately. And again, I'm sorry it's so large. But anyways, it's going to let you know immediately, hey, you did something wrong. And that's how you should think about your tests. Think of them like little robots. They're going to run these things through for you. So every time you save, or every time you run your test, they're just going to execute all of these so that you don't have to do it manually. So let's go ahead and fix that back. And now, this looks good, but there's one problem here. Let's go into Eloquent and var dump. Let's run PHP unit again. And now we're going to get hitting the DB. So here's the problem with what we're doing here. Post controller. We're trying to test this, but we're not really concerned with testing the database layer. That should have its own test. But now, every time I test this, I'm calling this post all. That's being bound to Eloquent post repository, and then we're hitting the database. And there's really, we shouldn't be doing that. It's going to slow down our test. We're sort of doubling up. We don't care what is returned from post all. We just care that post all was called. So how could we fix that? The key would be to use mocking. In PHP unit, mocking is available, but also I like, and plenty of people sort of prefer to use a tool called mockery. So how would you install mockery? Well, you leverage the power of cumbersome. So here you can see I am requiring for development only, mockery/mockery. And then to install that, you would run composer install --dev. We want to install the development dependencies. So now, once you do that, you have this mockery class that you can use that offers you like kind of a clean API for doing some of these things. So let me show you how you might do that. Back to the post controller tests. And let's say the first thing we want to do, because we have mockery, is we want to run function, tear down. This is just something you'll do every time if you're using mockery. Within your test case, and all of your future controllers should, extend test case. So here, let's just make sure we run mockery. And you'll see this in the documentation. Just make sure it closes after every test. All right, so now let's say mocked, and we will say mockery, mock, response, post repository interface. So now we're going to say, okay, we want to mock the post repository interface. And then I can say mock. I tell you guys, it's nervous being up here. You need to understand. Okay. Mock should receive the all method once and return. And like I noted before, we don't really care exactly what is returned. We're just going to say we're going to mock that post repository interface, and we're going to expect when we call our controller, this is called get post, we want to make sure that the all method is called on whatever repository you inject into the controller. So now, let's see, is that enough? Is that all we have to do? Well, if I run it, method all from post repository interface should be called exactly one time, but called 0. So come back. The problem here is we've created our mock object, but then we didn't really do anything with it. And in fact, it's going to make our test fail because we haven't told Laravel, hey, when you need, like we did before, when you need that instance of post repository interface, we told it to use Eloquent post repository, right? But now we want to say, no, we want you to use our mocked version, and that way, Eloquent post repository is never hit. So let's try this out. App instance of post repository interface should be our mock. And now it works. And what's even better though, it works, and notice that before, when we were hitting the database with Eloquent, we had this little var dump hint. Well now, it's not happening because right here, the contents here, this is never firing. We're not concerned with testing this. We're testing our controller. So here, let's just go over it one more time. We're going to mock the interface. Then we're going to make sure that when we call get post, we want to make sure the all method is called on your implementation. And it's going to return foo. We don't really care what it returns. Then we're going to tell, and this is the good stuff. And this is the same as here. Remember when we created a binding? Well, now we're going to say, when you need it now, I want you to set the instance of whatever you found there to our mock object. And this is it. Mockery is not that confusing. It just feels confusing because, again, it's this, I don't know, it's confusing terminology, and a lot of people don't even bother doing it because of that. But it's very simple stuff. You're just creating mock objects. All right, so this looks good, but the next thing I want to talk about is readability and also writability. And this is something we don't talk about as much with our testing. Like, this is, I don't know, 7 lines of code, but if you had never seen this before and you came to it, you would have to spend a little bit of time to figure out what it's doing. All right, it's mocking something. What is app instance? Maybe you're not as familiar with Laravel. You're calling something, then insert true response. You just have to read too much. We want to make our test as easy as humanly possible to write, because as we all know, if the tests are too difficult, the huge majority of people will never bother. So let's figure out, maybe we can make this just a little bit cleaner. Like, let's say instead of assert true response is okay, what if we said assert request okay? Something like that. Well, let's run it. Of course, it's going to fail because we don't have that. So we'll do our test case now right here. Function assert request okay. And then we could, if I backtrack, we could just paste that in there. But think about it. We don't have access to that response variable anymore that we created right here. Well, that's easy. We can just say this client get response. Get the client object and get the response, and essentially the exact same code. Run it. And now it's working, but now I know this seems like a very small win. Okay, well I could read it before. These are small wins, but I think they're important. this assert request OK. Then every future test you write, if you want to make sure that's good, you don't have to remember is it response is OK or maybe something else. Just call these readable methods. Let's talk about this next one. This one, again, it's like assert true, and then maybe you don't even know what bang bang means. What the heck does that mean? Then response, original. It takes 5 seconds. So let's make it take 1 second. Let's say this assert view receives post. I think that's a lot more readable. When I call this, I want to make sure that it sends through to the view a variable called posts. And let's try that out. I'm going to use the shortcut here. Okay, so let's go through this. All right, so when we say this assert view receives, again, we're pretty much replicating everything we've already written. We're going to get the response and store it in a variable, just to make it a little easier. Then we're going to call response the original content, or like I noted before, you could just say original. So we're going to get that property, or we're going to get the value. And we're going to say, okay, 2 options here. The first option is what we've already done. This assert true prop, just make sure it's a truly value. If there's nothing there, it'll be null, so that'll fail. But we also want to give them the option to say, okay, this is good. Or we can say, let's make sure that the view receives a post variable and it's equal to foo. I want to offer that option as well. And so that's what we're doing here in our test case, is offering a second argument, val, and we're going to set that to null. So if they do specify a value, then let's return, because if I didn't return, it's going to run both of those tests. So let's just return this assert equals that the value is equal to the property. Let's try it. Save that, come back, run it again, it still works. So again, very little wins, but now think how much more readable this is. Assert the request is OK, and then assert that the view receives a variable called post, and that's equal to foo. All right, so these are good, but this mocking is ugly. It really is. Maybe we could improve this a bit. So this could be a little controversial. Let's talk about this. Wouldn't it be cool if instead of doing those 3 lines, I could say something along the lines of post should receive all once and return foo. And then we could get rid of that entirely. I think that's a lot more readable. However, here's the controversial part. To allow for this sort of functionality would mean we would need to edit one of our models. And then you're at the point, 10 minutes, thank you. That's good. Then you're at the point where you're adding test logic into your production code. And if you've read some of the testing Bibles, that is a code smut. You don't want to be putting test logic into your production code. I get that totally. This is something you need to decide for yourself. You could just as easily extend the test case and then put your mocking there into a helper method. But I also think there's a lot to be said for readability. And in fact, this is something Laravel does in one of the latest betas. You can access should receive off of a lot of the facades. So you can say Q should receive. You could say, a lot of the facades, you can access this directly off. And some might say, that's test logic in your production code, that's bad practice, don't do it. I think you should decide for yourself, does the readability of this trump maybe a small downside? It's up to you. Let's stick with this though and see if we can make that work. Why don't we go to our models and create a base model. And because I'm short on time, I'm going to add a snippet here. So we're going to create a base model. It extends eloquent. You probably created base models many times. And now we're going to add our should receive method. And this is, again, basically exactly what we've already done. We called get called class because remember, our post model is going to extend base model. All our future eloquent models will extend this. So I'm going to use get called class to make sure that that returns post rather than base model. So here we're just grabbing the name of the repo. We're going to assume now that there's an interface called post repository interface. Then we're going to mock that. Then, as we did before, we're going to tell Laravel the instance of post repository interface. I want you to use our mocked version. And then we're going to call should receive, and then we'll send through an array of all the arguments. So if you say should receive post, that'll get sent through. Now, with that saved, I hope if we did this all right, that I can get rid of that entirely. Run it? Yes, it works. So, small wins, but this is incredibly important. If you want to write your tests and you want to actually get into a flow, then you need to create just a way to make it easier for yourself. You want to make it more readable to others looking at your code, and you want to make it more writable for you, so you're not having to refer to the documentation all of the time. So we'll do just one more. What about a store function? So let's say like you go to posts/create. That will show a form to create a new post. You fill it out. You click submit. Well, if we're following kind of a RESTful pattern, that should post to the collection. So that would do. This is so hard to speak. That should post to post. Is basically what would happen there. Then that would execute the store function. So let's just test that. We're going to say, okay, when that happens, we want to call a store method on our repository once. And again, return truthy. All I care about is that a truthy value is returned, not false, not anything else. So let's test it. We call post, and then we're going to assert redirected to. This is a new one. And this is, again, write how you want to interact with your API before you write the code. This is kind of a common best practice. So here, maybe you're not exactly sure how to write or how to prove that you were redirected to. So we'll just say assert redirected to post. That seems readable. And let me just write the quick functionality for that. And that indentation. Anyways, okay, so now, now we're going to assert redirected to, and if I say post, how can we do that? Well, again, we get the response. And then I'm going to create this variable called redirected to, again, just for readability. And we're going to say response, the headers, and we want to get the location. So we'll figure out what that will be. And that will be something like localhost/posts or something. Then here's our two assertions. We're going to assert that status code. Well, we don't want a 200 because when we call that, it's going to redirect to you, right? So we want to assert a status code of 302. Then, if we want to make sure exactly, like maybe you're okay just making sure you were redirected. But if you want to prove, I want to assert that we were redirected to posts, then we're going to add this one as well. We'll just say assert equals localhost/posts, and then whatever's stored there. Okay. Running low on time, so let me try this. And we're going to get our first failure. We asserting that 200 was 302, so we need to make that work. So this would mean we go to our post controller, and just anyways, this is very, very basic code. You would want to do a lot more. But we're going to call the store method. So now we know that our interface needs to also offer public functions. And then, of course, any implementation, now that you've updated your interface, also needs to offer that as well. So function, store, and then maybe your data or something like that. All right, let's run it and see what happens now. And now it's working. So again, assert redirected to is a lot more readable than having to do client get response, then get the location, and then make sure that this equals that. It's just too difficult to create these helper methods for yourself. And that way, when you're writing your test, it's as readable as humanly possible. All right, final thing. Let's make sure what happens if, when we call post store, what if for some reason that fails? We want to test for that too. Well, maybe if that fails, we want to redirect to post.create. If you're not familiar with this syntax, this is fairly new to version 4. It's basically when you create a resource, it's also going to create the named versions for you. So if I say post.create, that will of course create the, or that will route to the necessary method. So test fails, and this will be the final one, and we'll be done. So now, post should receive store once, but this time, rather than returning foo or a truthy value, it's going to return false. For some reason, it couldn't be saved to the database. Then we're going to call, this time, we're going to post to /posts. And I want to assert this time something failed, so I probably want to redirect maybe back to post/create or somewhere else, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to make sure that that happens for my test. And then again, that way the robots that I was talking about, those will do it every single time. So if you screw up, they're going to catch it and tell you immediately. We run it, and now it works. And that's because right here, we notice we checked. If it was saved, then we're going to redirect here. Otherwise, we're going to redirect there, and then probably you want to send through like input, other stuff like that. But we don't care. Anyway, so yeah, that's basically it. A lot of stuff, and this is just testing your controllers. There's a whole other level if you want to test your models. Do you want to use a SQLite database in memory? That might be a way to go too. This is just one way to do it. There's many different kinds of testing. Using BrowserKit if you want to fill out forms. If you want to do like integration testing, which would touch the database. There's a lot to cover here, but hopefully if this is new to you, this will kind of get you started. All right, so that's basically it. If you guys have any questions for me, or I don't know about NetTouch, or Envato, or my hobbies, go ahead.
Is there any way to automate these tests? So like,
Yeah, you would. Well, some people don't like automating, but yeah, I probably would. If you use Sublime Text too, you can use package controller to install a PHP unit tool, and that will set it up for you. There's lots of different things. Just Google it.
Have you tried doing testing with VPAC?
Yeah, yeah. That's cool too. Again, there's so many tools here. I think the problem, more people don't test, it just quickly gets overwhelming. There are so many test suites. There's TDD, there's behavior-driven development. There's so much to do, and that's why it becomes overwhelming for people, and they don't do it at all. So I would recommend just pick something. Just if this is all you do, that's fine. That'll get you started, and then slowly level up. Yes?
I noticed that you didn't mark the view, and that would mean that if you were...
You can mark the view too.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah.
Okay.
You can mark the view too. I'm trying to be quick here.
Yeah, I just thought this is you were trying to be quicker, but there was some good reason not to do that.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, you can mark the view. Anyone else? Great.